The marketplace was buzzing with activity, a cacophony of alien languages blending into an unintelligible hum. Jack navigated through the maze of booths, his eyes darting between bizarre items, glowing fruits, levitating trinkets, and a suspicious-looking tentacle massage device. He wasn't here for sightseeing, he needed something profitable, fast. His luck had been running on fumes, and his ship was just as broke as he was. That's when he spotted her. Behind a grimy glass enclosure, nestled between a two-headed reptile and a singing plant, sat a tiny figure no larger than a human hand. Her skin shimmered like liquid gold under the flickering lights, and her wide, violet eyes seemed to plead silently. A label beneath her cage read, "Rare living doll, exotic pet for discerning collectors." Jack leaned closer. "No way she's real," he muttered, squinting. But as if on cue, the tiny creature shifted, giving him a subtle glance that screamed, "Get me out of here, idiot." He straightened up, glancing around to see if anyone else had noticed her. It didn't seem like it. The crowd passed by, more interested in the grotesque monstrosities displayed nearby. "Hey, how much for the doll?" Jack asked, feigning nonchalance. The merchant, a greasy blob of a being with 6 eyes stacked vertically on his face, gave him a toothy grin. "For you, human? Special price. Only 15,000 credits." Jack almost choked. 15,000? For something that tiny? Does she come with her own spaceship? She's one of a kind. Very obedient. Perfect pet for lonely travelers. The merchant leaned in conspiratorially. Also, she sings. Jack glanced back at the tiny alien. She rolled her eyes so hard he almost laughed. "Yeah, sure, a singing pet. Look, I'll give you 200 credits, and I'm being generous." 200? The merchant's laugh was like wet gravel sliding down a chute. "You insult me!" Jack shrugged, turning to leave. "Fine. Good luck selling her to someone with more money than sense." "Wait!" the merchant called, panic flashing in all 6 eyes. 1,000 credits. Final offer. Jack smirked. 200, and I'll throw in a case of Earth coffee beans. Limited supply. Exotic on this side of the galaxy. The merchant's eyes widened. "Coffee beans? You carry such luxuries? Take it or leave it," Jack said, already pulling out a small pouch of the beans. He held it up, letting the rich aroma waft toward the merchant, who sniffed greedily. "Deal," the blob said reluctantly, unlocking the cage with a slimy appendage. "She's your problem now." The tiny alien stepped out cautiously, brushing off invisible dust with an air of dignity that seemed utterly out of place for someone who'd been sold like a trinket. She looked up at Jack, her violet eyes narrowing. "Don't worry," Jack said, trying to sound reassuring. "You're free now." She raised an eyebrow, her expression a mix of amusement and exasperation. "Free? You just bought me, genius!" Jack blinked. "Wait, you can talk?" Her voice was crisp, with a faint accent that made her sound annoyingly sophisticated. "Obviously. Did you think I was going to bark or meow?" "Well, the sign said pet," Jack mumbled, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "Pet," she repeated, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "How charming! What next? You going to make me fetch your slippers?" Jack scratched the back of his neck. No. I mean, look, let's just get out of here before someone changes their mind." As they weaved through the marketplace, chaos erupted behind them. Jack looked back to see a riot breaking out at the merchant's booth. Apparently, he'd been selling more than just exotic pets, and one of his other customers wasn't too happy about it. "Looks like you've got a knack for leaving a mess in your wake," Zyla said dryly as they slipped into the shadows. "Zyla?" Jack asked, catching the name off a tiny tag she wore around her neck. She sighed. "Yes, my name is Zyla. Now let's focus on getting far, far away from this cesspool, shall we?" "You don't have to tell me twice," Jack muttered, leading her toward his beat-up ship parked in a junkyard nearby. As they approached the rusty starliner, Zyla paused, her arms crossed. "That's your ship? Hey, don't judge." She's got character. Character? She looks like she's been chewed up and spat out by a black hole. Jack waved her off. She flies. That's all that matters. Zyla didn't look convinced, but she followed him aboard. As the ship's rickety doors hissed shut behind them, she gave one last, disdainful glance at the marketplace fading into the distance. Well, I guess I traded one prison for another. Hey, Jack said, shooting her a mock glare. You're welcome. She smirked. Don't thank me yet, human. You have no idea what you've just gotten yourself into. Jack chuckled, shaking his head. You know, for a pet, you're pretty mouthy. And for a so-called rescuer, you're remarkably clueless. As the ship's engine sputtered to life, their banter filled the small cabin, setting the tone for a partnership either of them had expected, or entirely wanted. The rusty Starliner rattled to life, its engines coughing like an elderly smoker. Zyla sat perched on a control panel, her legs swinging idly as she observed Jack wrestle with the ship's outdated controls. Her tiny frame might have been adorable to someone else, but her sharp gaze and even sharper tongue made it clear she wasn't one to be underestimated. So, what's the plan, Captain? She asked, her tone dripping with mock respect. Fly off into the void and hope we don't explode? Jack shot her a sideways glance. First of all, don't call me Captain. Second, the plan is to lay low, maybe find a spot where we won't get tracked. You know, something sensible. Sensible? Coming from the guy whose ship sounds like it's held together with duct tape and prayers? Zyla raised an eyebrow. You inspire so much confidence. Hey, she's reliable. Jack snapped, patting the console defensively. A panel promptly fell off, clanging to the floor. He groaned as Zyla burst into laughter, her tiny voice somehow managing to sound both melodic and infuriating. Well, if this doesn't scream competent hero, I don't know what does, she teased, crossing her arms. Jack sighed, rubbing his temples. Look, I just saved your life. Could you maybe tone down the sass for 5 minutes? Saved my life? Zyla tilted her head, pretending to ponder. No, I think you bought my life, which is entirely different. Jack groaned. Fine. Whatever. Just sit tight, okay? I need to focus on not crashing. Zyla hopped off the console, wandering around the cramped cabin. Not much to sit on, is there? Or is this supposed to double as a prison cell? It's cozy, Jack grumbled, flipping switches. And it's all I've got, so you might want to adjust your attitude. Oh, believe me, my attitude is perfectly adjusted, for someone who's been stuck in a cage for the last decade. That gave Jack pause. He glanced over at her, her words sinking in. A decade? You were stuck in that thing for 10 years? Zyla shrugged, trying to play it off. Give or take. Time flies when you're being poked at by greasy merchants and gawked at by idiots with more money than brains. Jack frowned, guilt tugging at him. That sucks. I didn't know. Why would you? She said, her voice softer now. To you, I'm just a shiny little trinket, right? Something to show off or sell for a quick profit. Jack winced. Hey, I'm not like that. Oh, really? Then why did you buy me? Zyla's eyes narrowed, challenging him. Jack hesitated. He could feel the weight of her question, but he wasn't sure he liked the answer. I don't know, he admitted finally. Maybe because I couldn't stand seeing you stuck there. Maybe because I thought you'd be worth something. Maybe both. Zyla studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she smirked. Well, at least you're honest. That's something. Jack rolled his eyes. Yeah, I'm a regular saint. They fell into an uneasy silence, the hum of the ship's engines filling the void. Zyla eventually wandered over to a corner, where a stack of Jack's scavenged junk was piled haphazardly. She started sifting through it, her curiosity piqued. What is all this? She asked, holding up a rusted gizmo that looked like it might have been a toaster in a past life. Just stuff I've picked up, Jack said distractedly, still fiddling with the controls. Scrap, mostly. Sometimes I find something valuable, sell it off to keep this bucket flying. Silas snorted. And I thought my life was pathetic. Hey, it pays the bills, Jack shot back. Not that you'd know anything about that. Oh, you'd be surprised, Zyla said, her tone suddenly more serious. She held up a small device, its screen flickering faintly. This isn't scrap. Jack glanced over, frowning. What do you mean? I mean it's not junk, Zyla said, her eyes narrowing as she examined the device. It's a communication relay. Old, but still functional. Where did you find this? Jack shrugged. Some wreckage on a dead planet. Why? Zyla didn't answer immediately. Instead, she began tapping on the device, her tiny fingers surprisingly nimble. The screen flickered to life, displaying a series of alien symbols that Jack couldn't make heads or tails of. Whoa, wait a minute, Jack said, standing up. What are you doing? Making myself useful, Silas said without looking up. You might not realize it, but this little gadget could be our ticket out of whatever mess you've gotten us into. Jack frowned. What kind of ticket? Let's just say it's better if you don't ask too many questions, Zyla replied cryptically. Jack crossed his arms. Yeah, no. That's not how this works. If you're messing with my stuff, I want to know why. Zyla sighed, looking up at him with an expression that was equal parts exasperation and pity. Fine. If you must know, I'm trying to see if this thing can connect to the galactic network. If it can, I might be able to reach out to some old contacts. Jack's eyes narrowed. Old contacts? Like who? Silas smirked. Let's just say they're not the kind of people you'd want to bring home to meet your parents. Jack groaned. Great. So now I'm harboring a fugitive? Silas shrugged. Fugitive, freedom fighter, it's all a matter of perspective. Jack ran a hand through his hair, muttering under his breath. What the hell have I gotten myself into? Zyla grinned, clearly enjoying his discomfort. Relax, human. I'm not going to get you killed. Probably. Comforting, Jack muttered, slumping back into his seat. Just don't blow up my ship, okay? No promises, Zyla said cheerfully, returning her attention to the device. As she worked, Jack found himself watching her, his irritation gradually giving way to curiosity. For someone so small, she had an air of confidence that was impossible to ignore. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a fighter, and he couldn't help but admire that. Of course, he'd never admit it. Not out loud, anyway. Jack leaned back in his seat, his arms crossed as he watched Zyla work. She was completely engrossed in the device, her tiny fingers dancing across the screen with a precision that made him feel clumsy in comparison. He didn't fully trust her, hell, he didn't fully trust anyone, but there was something about her that made it hard to look away. You're staring, Zyla said without glancing up, her tone a mixture of amusement and annoyance. Jack blinked, quickly looking away. No, I'm not. Yes, you are, she said, glancing at him briefly. Don't worry, I get it. You've probably never met anyone like me before. Jack snorted. You mean tiny, mouthy, and bossy? Yeah, you're definitely one of a kind. Zyla smirked. I'll take that as a compliment. She turned her attention back to the screen, her expression growing more focused. Got it. Got what? Jack asked, leaning forward. The relay is active, she said. I've tapped into the galactic network. Now let's see if I can track down the people who put me in that cage. Jack frowned. Wait a second. You're going after them? Isn't that dangerous? Silas shrugged. Maybe. But I've been playing the victim long enough. It's time to remind them who they're dealing with. Jack sighed, rubbing his temples. And I suppose I'm just along for the ride? Pretty much, Silas said cheerfully. Don't worry, I'll make sure you don't get killed. Probably. Jack groaned. You really need to work on your reassurances. I'm a realist, Silas said with a grin. Now sit back and let me handle this. Jack watched as she navigated the network, her confidence both impressive and unnerving. She was clearly more than she appeared, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was in way over his head. "You never did tell me who you really are," Jack said after a moment. "Or why they put you in that cage." Zyla paused, her fingers hovering over the screen. For a moment, her expression softened, a flicker of something vulnerable passing across her face. Then it was gone, replaced by her usual smirk. "Let's just say I have a history with the galactic elite," she said. "They didn't like the fact that I wouldn't bow down to them. So they decided to remove me from the equation." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Remove you? By turning you into a pet?" Zyla's smirk faltered, and she looked away. "It was easier for them to pretend I wasn't a threat if they made me look like a trophy. Something pretty to show off, but ultimately harmless." Jack felt a pang of sympathy, though he tried to hide it. "That's messed up." Zyla shrugged. "It's politics. The galaxy's full of people who'll do whatever it takes to keep their power. But they made a mistake when they underestimated me." Jack couldn't help but smile. "You're pretty confident for someone who's been stuck in a cage for a decade." Zyla shot him a glare. "Confidence is all I've got. Well, that and a sharp mind. Speaking of which," she turned the screen toward him, a list of names and locations displayed in glowing text. "These are the people responsible for my situation. The ones who made sure my species was labeled as non-sentient so they could justify enslaving us." Jack's smile faded. "And what are you planning to do with that information?" Zyla's grin returned, but this time it was cold and calculated. "I'm going to make them pay." Jack stared at her, a mix of admiration and concern swirling in his mind. "And you expect me to help you with this?" "Of course," Zyla said matter-of-factly. "You're my ticket out of here, remember? Besides, you owe me." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Owe you? For what?" "For rescuing you from a life of mediocrity," Zyla said with a wink. "Face it, Jack. You've been drifting through life without a purpose. Well, now you've got one." Jack groaned. "Great. Just what I needed. A purpose." Zyla laughed, the sound surprisingly genuine. "Don't worry, human. I'll make sure it's worth your while." Jack wasn't sure if he believed her, but he couldn't deny the spark of excitement that her plan ignited within him. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. Even if that something was completely insane. The galaxy's elite didn't even notice the small ship drifting into orbit around the luxury station. To them, it was just another speck in the vastness of space, one of countless insignificant vessels. That worked perfectly for Zyla and Jack. The less attention they attracted, the easier this would be. Zyla finished calibrating the cloaking device she'd rigged up from Jack's scavenged junk. "This should keep us off their scanners long enough to get inside. After that, it's on you." Jack blinked. "On me? What happened to we're in this together?" "I never said that," Zyla replied, smirking. "You're the human, they'll underestimate you. Play to their biases, act clueless, and let me do the real work." Jack crossed his arms. "Oh, sure. I'll just walk into the most secure station in the galaxy and act like a tourist." "No problem." "Exactly," Zyla said, her tone saccharine. "See? You're catching on." Jack groaned but didn't argue. He knew better by now. Arguing with Zyla was like arguing with gravity. It was a losing battle every time. The plan was deceptively simple. Zyla had pinpointed one of her targets, a pompous aristocrat named Loras Vryn, who was hosting an exclusive event on the station. Jack would infiltrate the party as a bumbling newcomer while Zyla, hidden in his jacket pocket, worked her magic. If everything went smoothly, they'd expose Vryn's involvement in the conspiracy, and make their escape before anyone knew what hit them. Of course, nothing ever went smoothly. The moment Jack stepped into the grand hall, he felt out of place. The attendees were draped in shimmering robes, their every gesture dripping with wealth and arrogance. Meanwhile, Jack looked like he'd wandered in from a construction site, which, to be fair, wasn't far from the truth. "Try to blend in," Zyla whispered from his pocket. Her voice was muffled but no less exasperated. And stop fidgeting. You look like you're about to rob the place. I feel like I'm about to get thrown out, Jack muttered, forcing himself to stand a little straighter. As he moved through the crowd, he couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversation, idle gossip, business deals, and the occasional thinly veiled insult. The sheer pretentiousness of it all made him want to roll his eyes. Focus, Zyla hissed. There he is. Jack followed her gaze, or rather, her pointed finger poking out of his pocket, to a rotund alien in an extravagant cape. Loras Vryn was holding court near the center of the room, surrounded by sycophants hanging on his every word. Jack took a deep breath and approached the group, plastering on what he hoped was a convincing smile. Excuse me, is this where the appetizers are? I've been looking everywhere for something to eat. The sycophants stared at him, clearly scandalized by his interruption. Vryn, however, seemed more amused than offended. And who, may I ask, are you? Jack, he said, sticking out his hand. Jack, star trader. Just passing through. Vryn eyed him for a moment before chuckling. A trader, are you? Well, I suppose even the unrefined must eat. Jack's smile tightened, but he kept it in place. Yeah, unrefined. That's me. As the group returned to their conversation, Jack subtly adjusted his posture, allowing Zyla a better vantage point from his pocket. She wasted no time, activating a small device she'd smuggled in. Within seconds, holographic images began flickering to life on a nearby table, displaying incriminating documents that Vryn had foolishly kept on the station's servers. Is that? One of the sycophants began, their eyes widening as they recognized the content. Vryn's laughter died in his throat. What is the meaning of this? Looks like some interesting reading, Jack said, feigning ignorance as he stepped closer to the table. Wow, is that your name on these slave trade contracts? Man, that's gotta be embarrassing. The room erupted into chaos. Guests scrambled to distance themselves from Vryn, while security guards closed in on Jack. He raised his hands in mock surrender, grinning despite the danger. Okay, Zyla, he whispered. Any time now. Working on it, she replied, her tone calm despite the tension. The device in her hands emitted a sharp ping, signaling that the data had been broadcast across the galactic network. And done. Great, Jack said. Now how about we? Before he could finish, a guard grabbed him by the arm, yanking him toward the exit. Zyla, quick as ever, slipped from his pocket and into the shadows, unseen by anyone but Jack. As he was dragged out of the hall, Jack couldn't help but grin. Well, this was fun. Let's do it again sometime. Outside, Zyla reunited with him, her expression triumphant. We did it. The whole galaxy knows what they've been up to now. Jack raised an eyebrow. We? Pretty sure I was the one who almost got thrown into an airlock. Details, Zyla said with a wave of her hand. The point is, they're ruined. And we're just getting started. Jack shook his head, chuckling despite himself. You're something else, you know that? Zyla smirked. And don't you forget it. As they boarded the rusty Starliner and prepared to leave the station behind, Jack couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. He might have been a reluctant hero, but with Zyla by his side, life was anything but boring. And honestly, he wouldn't have it any other way.